Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
In this episode of Advanced Freelancing, I'm talking to a translator who speaks multiple languages. My guest today is Maeva Cifuentes, and we're talking a little bit about how to have a diverse marketing strategy and who translation is right for. Maeva has been a French and Spanish to English freelance translator for just over a decade. She writes about freelance translation and the digital nomad lifestyle on her blog, Maeva Everywhere. As a person with multiple interests, she's diversified her services into marketing and recently launched a content marketing agency. You can usually find her writing on LinkedIn, traveling, learning a new skill, or listening to her favorite music. Let's dive into the episode. Hello, everyone. It's time for another episode of Advanced Freelancing, and my guest today is a freelance translator, and her name is Maeva. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me.
I'd love for you to share a little bit about how did you get into freelancing to start with? Did you have another job before? Have you been freelancing a long time?
Yeah, so I've been freelancing since 2009, so a bit over 10 years now. At the beginning, I was working a night job, or I started in a day job in a restaurant, and I was doing freelancing more kind of as a side hustle. And then I decided to start doing it full time or to do it more seriously. But at the time, I wasn't making enough income to survive off of only that. So I was bartending at night and building my freelance translation business during the day. And that took me about maybe a bit under a year to get it to the point where I could survive fully off of my freelance translation business.
I think that applies to a lot of people. It makes a lot of sense to start out as a side hustle, and very few people I know have been able to build this to a full-time business where they can, pay themselves and kind of meet or exceed, what they need for their basic needs and their living costs. What drew you to translation specifically?
So the main thing that drew me to translation was my parents, who are both translators. But what I really liked about it is I saw them working and I saw, the freedom of freelancing. So they chose their clients, they chose their hours, and particularly in translation, even though we do specialize and we are recommended to specialize and choose a subject matter, you deal with so many different kinds of documents and you learn so much, and it's incredible how much information you can get your hands on. And as a naturally curious person, I really enjoyed that part of translation.
Yeah, learning something new is definitely an interesting thing about working in certain kinds of freelance industries. I found the same thing being a writer. I was always researching something new and learning something different. Did you find that over time, as you got more translation experience, that you did feel like you wanted to focus in a particular industry, or did you decide, you know what, I want to keep the variety and work on a bunch of different projects?
No, I decided that to specialize, mainly because in translation, unless you have a very rare language pair, like, I don't know, Swahili to Swedish or something, I work with French and Spanish into English, those are very common language pairs. So you have to specialize to stand out as a translator. So after dabbling in a lot of different kind of things, when I began, I decided to specialize in two areas, which was legal and marketing translations. And that helped me position myself and find clients that were looking, because if you are a lawyer and you're looking to get a contract translated, you don't want a generalist person who does a bit of, maritime, marketing, luxury, medical. It just is hard to convince this client that you're going to understand what their document is about. So I did decide to specialize, but I had a dual specialization because it was hard for me to choose between those two.
And I think that's an excellent point anyways, because it's good to have a handful of different things that you can work in case the industry changes dramatically in one. I know, for example, right now, there's a couple of, freelancers that I've worked with who their specialization was in travel, and that industry has changed dramatically in light of the pandemic. And so having kind of a backup industry or type of work that you do can be really beneficial. Now, you mentioned that you have skills in at least 3 languages. What tips would you have for someone who's just getting started? Do you recommend that they need to have been not just fluent, but speaking or writing this language for a certain period of time in order to feel confident and do a really great job as a translator of that language?
So what's very important is that you write very, very well. So translation is only written. If you want to do spoken translation, it's actually called interpreting. And the important part in translation is that you are an excellent writer in your target language, which for me is English. So it's whatever your native language is. In terms of the source language, which is the language that you're translating from, it's important that you understand very well. You don't need native writing ability in those languages, but you do need to be able to understand cultural references, because it's not always just going to be the language that you learned in school. You need to understand different nuances that's not only from the language itself, but also from the different regions that they're from. So for example, I translate French from France, but not necessarily French from Canada, because there's a lot of cultural references there that I may not understand. Or in Spanish, I'll translate from Spain because I live here in Spain, and Colombia because my dad is Colombian, but I may not take documents from Argentina, or in terms of legal documents, I won't take documents from Mexico because I don't know Mexican law, so I can't translate contracts from that legal system. So it is important that you are at a level that you could, for example, watch a movie or read a book in that language, but you don't need to sound like a native speaker, and you don't need to write like a native speaker in the source language.
Really good points, because especially in certain industries, I can see where it makes a lot of sense that you want to have those cultural references and feel really confident that you understand what has been written so that you can translate that into another language and make sure that the same point and context is getting across. So one thing I'd love to know is, what does a typical day look like for you? Is it different every day, or do you kind of have a set schedule that you work with? And kind of how do you manage your projects from the moment that you get a translation project from a client?
So every day is different, like for every freelancer, I imagine. Especially now in the last 2 years, I've also started working in marketing, not just translation, but actually building a marketing agency. So my days look even more different than before. But if we're looking at what my day looked like when I was only a translator, I guess it would be depending on whether I have a project that day. Normally every Sunday I look through my emails, all of the projects that I've accepted or that need to be delivered. And I like to basically spend some time translating the document. I always try to get a day free before the delivery date, so I can actually review before I need to deliver. So the days would look something like answering emails, translating, taking a break. There's also a lot of forums and Facebook groups for translators where you help people answer business questions and terminology questions. Spend a little time on those. Depending on whether my work was slow in that period or not, then I spend some time doing some marketing on LinkedIn or looking up clients that I would like to work with, sending out some cold emails. Or if I had a very busy schedule, then I would spend the day translating and then maybe the next day just reviewing. Or sometimes you share a project with another translator, so you spend the day setting up the project in a CAT tool, which is a tool that translators use, computer-assisted translation. Not the same as machine translation. It's actually a productivity tool that helps you segment the translation into a translation memory, and you can work together with other translators. So sometimes if you have a very large project, you can set that up with another translator, share terminology. I mean, every day is very different because projects can last anywhere from 1 day to 2 weeks to even a month. So I would just look every week at the beginning or the end of the week and try to plan it out that way. But I couldn't say that any 2 days are the same.
Yeah, I think that's the case for so many different freelancers too, is that, and that's part of why we like it, is that it changes a little bit. Now, I imagine with something like social media or content writing, we could make the argument that pretty much every client who has an online presence needs those services. So it's a little bit maybe perhaps different to pitch them. What have you found to be effective with marketing translation services? Do you just target certain kinds of companies that are more likely to need a translator, or are you looking for, I don't even know if there's such a thing as like a job board for translators, the way that exists for, graphic designers and web developers and content writers. So just kind of curious about your marketing process of deciding who might be the right person to pitch.
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura. There are several boards, job boards for translators, and that's where I started. There's one of the most famous ones is Pros or ProZ, depending on people pronounce it differently. It has a bit of a controversial reputation because it's kind of a job bidding platform. So people post their jobs on there, and sometimes it's a bid to the lowest price. So I started on there, and I did manage to get some great and long-term clients, but a lot of the jobs weren't of the highest quality for some other clients that I found. But it's a great place to start. And they also have a blue board, something called a blue board on there, which is a database of translation clients and translation agencies, and they've all been given a rating by other translators who have worked with them based on how pleasant they are to work with, how fast they pay, etc., how interesting their jobs are, etc. So either I would go on the job board and apply for things I found there when I was getting started, or I would go through the blue board and look through the translation agencies that would fit my specialization and my language pairs and start emailing them from there. There are also now a few different job boards. Some of them are pretty antiquated, but there are still a lot of jobs that are getting posted on there, like Translators Cafe. But I think that the new generation of translators are starting to create a lot more content on their own. There's this new, relatively new, I think it's a few years old, it's new compared to Pros and Translators Cafe. It's a platform called the Open Mic, which is actually a place for translators to share content. So it's more of a publication platform than it is a job portal. But you can actually go there and find translators and read through the content that they've written. So I think that's a really great platform for especially translators, clients who are looking for marketing and content writing translators, because you can see their writing right there. And another great place is joining professional associations. So there are professional associations in every region and every country. And one plus of joining them is that you get placed on a directory. And a lot of clients look there because they trust the associations, because several of them have entrance exams to get in. But what's really nice about the associations is that you can go to events and you have training and you can meet other translators. And other translators are an excellent source of work because you can collaborate with them. If you meet another translator who's in the same language pair and same specialization as you can review one another's work. And as you build trust, if one of you doesn't have the time to take on a project, but you want to keep your client, you can pass the work on to somebody that you trust. Or if you meet another translator who's not in the same language pair as you, then they could never take that work. And we have clients who are asking us, hey, do you know anybody who can translate into this language, or anybody who's specialized in this? And other translators and my colleagues have been a major source of really good work because they trust their clients and they trust me. They've seen my work. So I think that connecting with other translators is one of the best ways to find high quality work. and it's a great pleasure to work with other translators. And I think that that's where I would start. I'm now very active on LinkedIn, and I know that that's also a great source of work. There are just so many ways, in-person meeting. I'm very social and extroverted, so I would always go to events and talk a lot about translation. I was very passionate about it, and I did find a lot of work that way as well, because I also live in Barcelona. It's super metropolitan. There are a lot of startups here, and they're all ran by people from all over the world, really. So translation is a huge thing here. But in any other city, you're going to find, of course, it depends on your language pair and what you're working on, but going and meeting people, networking online and offline is one of the greatest sources of work, I would say.
Hey, if you're listening to this episode, then the Six Figure Freelancer book is available for pre-order. The book drops on October 20th, 2020, but you can pre-order the book now and get 4 special bonuses that no one else will have access to. Visit www.sixfigurefreelancebook.com to discover how you can pre-order and send in your receipt to get special bonuses that will be revealed to you and sent to your email inbox on October 1st, 2020. This is in addition to the 17 worksheets and exercises that come for everyone who buys the book. And trust me, you're going to want these bonuses: tips on branding, pricing, sales calls, and so much more. So having a consistent marketing schedule and different options to lean on is always so important, no matter what kind of freelance service that you offer. And being connected to other freelancers is so helpful, because even when they're not specifically in your niche or offering your service type, I know in the last week I referred 8 different people who came to me as part of a virtual conference to a project manager I trusted and to a marketing person that I trusted. And the nice thing about that is that relationship that gives and takes. So they might throw referrals your way, or one of my referral partners, my marketing person, he gives me like 10% of any referral who signs up with a program with him. And that's not why I do it, right? But it's great to have that relationship where if someone comes to me and I can tell they really need him and they decide that he is the right fit, like I do essentially get rewarded for that. In other relationships, you have people who connect you and say like, hey, this project came across my desk and I thought of you. So always good to have that variety. LinkedIn is one of my favorite marketing tools. Do you have any tips for a freelancer who's maybe just getting started on LinkedIn, on how, like, what are the 2 or 3 things you must do if basically your LinkedIn profile has been sitting there like a stale old resume? What should you do first to stand out as a freelancer?
So is the question a freelancer who's already experienced as a freelancer but not with LinkedIn, or somebody who's new at both of them?
So that's a great question. And I would say both. I mean, I'm interested to hear if you have a different recommendation for someone who's brand new to freelancing, and then someone who maybe has been freelancing for a while, but they haven't used LinkedIn at all and are not sure where to start with that.
Yeah, so for somebody who has experience already, then I think that LinkedIn is a great platform to share your expertise and share a lot of content. I think on LinkedIn, you need to be extremely active. It's a networking platform. It's not a place just to publish your CV. So I would say show a profile photo that's recent, that shows you smiling and makes you seem approachable. In your headline, make sure that you're not just writing. There's a lot of freelance translators who like to just write freelance translator, or they write, we have the language codes like FR for French and EN for English, and they write that. But clients aren't looking for that. They're not using those keywords because they don't think in the same way that translators think. So I would also try to be very sensitive to what people could be looking for and put those kind of keywords in your headline. And then share your expertise and your experience and how you've overcome translation challenges frequently on the platform. Now, if you're brand new to translation, you obviously don't really have any expertise to share. So that wouldn't really be the approach to take. And in that case, I would use it as still as a networking platform and try to connect with other freelancers and learn from them. And at that point, I would say try to choose a subject matter specialization and try to connect with people from those industries and learn from them. I think that when people are starting out, I recommend that they do some free work, but not for commercial translation, just because it's a very slippery slope for other translators when there are students or brand new translators that are offering translations for free or for nothing. And the quality can't be very good. I mean, even if they're very skilled people, if they're great writers, translation is something that you need to learn to do. So I think I wouldn't offer commercial translations for free. So I wouldn't use LinkedIn as a platform for finding that kind of experience work. But maybe there are some NGOs or nonprofit organizations that they could use some free translation, and you can connect with people on there to try to get a portfolio going and try to build something. And I would definitely, from the beginning, be very active on LinkedIn and try to connect with people. And whenever you start to get enough experience to share it and to help other people, then you can start creating your own content on there.
I like that. That's really helpful for people who are a little bit confused by LinkedIn and are trying to figure out, okay, what should my strategy be when I first get onto this site? Is there anything you wish you had known before you started working as a translator? I mean, obviously you have such a window into what that world of work is like because your parents are translators, but I'm curious if there's anything that might catch someone who's listening to this and is thinking about becoming a translator kind of off guard. Is there something they should know before they decide to make this one of the services they offer or focus exclusively on translating?
What would I have liked to know before? I guess I would have liked to know that it's not going to be only translation. That would be great. There are a lot of translators who love translation, but they don't like the business side of it. They don't like that they have to constantly think about filling their pipeline. They don't like the feast and famine cycle. And that's not what they were dreaming of when they were getting into translation. They were dreaming of speaking languages that they love and writing. So that's something that you need to be prepared for, which unfortunately, from what I understand and from my experience studying translation, they don't teach you that. In a master's or in a bachelor's in translation, they teach you the arts and techniques of translations. They teach you how to use CAT tools, but they don't teach you how to run a business. So that's something that's really important, to learn marketing, to learn sales, to learn to not be afraid to get on the phone and call people. I would have liked to know that I need to learn to speak in my client's lingo. So right now, if I'm working in marketing and I go to a CEO and tell him, hey, there's a grammar mistake here, which translators care about very deeply, or punctuation error, but CEOs don't care about that. That's not the language that you need to speak to them in. You need to say, hey, this language, this identity of your brand is going to help the bottom line, or this kind of language is going to be revenue generating. You know, you need to learn to speak in what is important to your client. And that's not only for being able to sell to them, and that's not only for building these relationships with them, but in the end, if you're going to be translating for them, you need to be able to speak like them too, because what if you're translating emails for them? You need to know how they speak. So one thing that's very important is to get really, really deep, really deeply immersed in your subject matter specialization, to the point that you could go to a trade show in client land, not with a bunch of other translators, but you could go to a trade show and it would take somebody a long time to realize that you're not actually one of them, but that you're a translator. So that's something I would start from the beginning, is to already get really involved with the people that are going to be your clients, and don't just see them as dollar signs. Don't just see them as, oh, I'm going to get another project, but to actually try to get involved in their goals and understand why they want to expand into other markets. For what reason do they want to translate something into English, and see how you can actually help them achieve goals instead of just deliver another product. There's a lot of complaints going on in the translation profession that it's getting commoditized, but that's also because translations are commoditizing it themselves. They're not interested in the goals of the client. They're not interested in adding value. They just want to get another translation job. So as long as you're treating it that way, you're going to be treated that way back. So I think that's something very important, to take a look at how other industries are working, like marketers and lawyers, or I don't know, other professionals are adding a lot of value, and we should be taking example from them. Otherwise, you're going to be treated like a commodity. And I think that's something that we can start doing from the very beginning.
Such an excellent tip, because yes, we are providing services to our clients where it can be essentially a commodity that's the deliverable at the end of the relationship, but it goes so much more than that. And the more that you can step into the mindset of your client about their overall business goals and how does the service that you're providing fit into that, and how can you help them maximize that, the easier it's going to be for them to be confident about working with you, not just this one time, but again in the future. Well,
Exactly.
I've learned so much about the translation business, and this is so fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people go to learn a little bit more about you and the kinds of services that you offer?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So I have a blog that I'm writing about. It's mostly for freelance translators, but I do talk about digital business in general, because I also work in marketing, and I'm now building a marketing agency. So that blog is maevaeverywhere.com. So my name, Maeva, everywhere. And that's my handle for all the social media. So on LinkedIn, it's Maeva Everywhere. On Instagram, Maeva Everywhere. On every channel, that's what it is. So it's pretty easy to find everywhere.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for coming on the show and sharing all of